On the 8th of July 1099, the Muslim defenders of Jerusalem saw a strange spectacle. A bunch of exhausted, starving Christian knights walking barefoot around the walls. It was an act of religious self-mortification designed to win the help of God. And it worked.
The knights turned their ships into siege engines, stormed the town, and what followed still seems grim even by the standards of the 20th century. Virtually everyone was slaughtered, men and women, children, the old, the infirm, until the knights were wading ankle-deep in blood. Jews were burnt alive in their synagogues, and the dead were piled outside in smoking pyramids, innumerable, in the words of one eyewitness, to all except God himself. Welcome to the Crusades.
In November 1095, Pope Urban II made the single most provocative speech of all time. He called for a crusade, a campaign to speed up the second coming of Christ by recapturing the holy places where Jesus had died on the cross and wresting them from Muslim control. Pope Urban thereby launched 2 centuries of intermittent mayhem featuring greed, treachery, sadism, and religious mania. And he created a symbol of Western aggression in the Middle East, a symbol so potent that some Muslims believe the Crusades have never actually ended.
And that's why we need to understand that bizarre conflict, the massacres, the cannibalism, the blood that flowed down these very streets, if we are to understand how it is that the word crusade still contaminates the Muslim idea of the West and of Western intentions.
At the heart of the Crusades was possession of the powerfully symbolic city of Jerusalem. For Jews, it's the ancient city of David, under the control of Israel since 1967. For Christians, it's the place of the crucifixion. And it's no wonder that in 637, Jerusalem was one of the first cities to be captured by the Arabs in the name of Islam.
Jerusalem represents a very important place in the Muslim world because it was the first place the Muslim had the Qibla, or direction of prayer, before directing to Mecca. And at the Dome of the Rock, according to the Muslim beliefs, Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven.
Pope Urban cited several justifications for his crusade: the attacks by Muslims on Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land, and the sufferings of the Eastern Christians who were native to the area. To any crusader prepared to right these wrongs, he made a once-in-a-lifetime offer.
If you go and recapture Jerusalem from the Muslims, and you help all the Eastern Christians who are suffering out there, being killed by the Muslims, and all our Western pilgrims who are prevented from going to the Holy Sepulchre, you will get a spiritual reward of unprecedented level. Really? I am promising you the remission of all the sins that you confess.
Armed with these get-out-of-hell-free cards, the First Crusade set off to rendezvous in Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of what we in the West call the Byzantine Empire. In reality, it was simply the eastern half of the Roman Empire, the prosperous Greek-speaking provinces that had survived after the sack of Rome in 476. And they survived very often thanks to these colossal 5th century walls, 60 meters in width. But by the 11th century, they were coming under remorseless pressure from the Muslim Turks, and the desperate Byzantine emperor swallowed his pride and appealed for help to his fellow Christian, the Pope in Rome. He got more than he bargained for. Some 60,000 people had taken the cross and made their way to Constantinople, and they were not exactly steady on parade.
You can imagine the reaction of the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus when the First Crusade pitched up outside his walls in Constantinople. He'd been expecting a crack army of knights to help him deal with the Turks. Instead, he got a ragtag and bobtail collection of peasants, paupers and fanatics, led by the evocatively titled Walter the Penniless, and a guy called Peter the Hermit who clutched a personal letter from Jesus Christ instructing him to go on the crusade. In other words, they were cranks, so fizzing with religious fervour that they'd been persecuting Jews on their way south through the Rhineland, so militarily incompetent that they'd already lost a quarter of their strength. "Stay right there," said Alexius Comnenus. "Don't move a muscle." Deciding not to wait for the main body of the Crusaders, this People's Crusade set off in the general direction of Jerusalem and were pretty badly duffed up for their pains.
But it was only a few months later that the knights arrived, a who's who of European barons, armed with pikes and halberds and all the latest in chainmail technology. They swore a great oath that the lands they reconquered would be handed to the Byzantine Emperor, and for 3 years they then hacked and slaughtered and besieged their way to Jerusalem.
The Crusaders had the power and the zeal to besiege Antioch for 9 continuing months. One of the longest siege in medieval time, shows how they were determined to stay.
In all of the cities that they occupied, they were really vicious. They killed almost everybody. They cleaned the cities totally from Muslims and from Jews. And in some cases, they killed 50, 60,000 in one city.
It was a while before the Muslims grasped what was happening to them. This wasn't some raid for booty. It was a holy war in full swing.
I think it pretty much took them by surprise. I think at the beginning, they mostly understood that these were mercenaries being hired by the Byzantines. I don't think they realized that what was really going on, that this was really, at least in Syria itself, that they had some grand plan to conquer Jerusalem and to set up some new state at their expense.
So were they aware of the religious dimension?
Very quickly, I think they became aware of the religious dimension.
So what did it mean for the Christians back in Europe, this miraculous recapture of Jerusalem? It was obvious. It showed God's blessing on the Crusades and his contempt for the enemy, who were not only ethnically different, they believed in the wrong religion. As Christian propagandists never tired of pointing out, with more venom than understanding.
The average cleric writing his polemical texts from the edges of the civilization in his monastery has really no idea what Islam is about. They're pagans for him is what they are. And often they create these imaginary pantheons of gods for them. Obviously Muhammad is one of the gods, but then he's got 3 or 4 others up there helping him to fight against Christianity. And so there's really no understanding about the fact that Islam is a monotheistic religion, that there is this shared heritage between the two.
Western knowledge of Islam in the sort of late 11th century is quite an interesting topic. I mean, there's some contradictions within that. I mean, you've actually got a letter written by Pope Gregory VII in 1076. He writes to a sultan, "Most certainly you and we ought to love each other in this way more than other races of men, because we believe and confess one God, albeit in different ways, whom each day we praise and reverence as the creator of all ages and the governor of this world." He's actually pointing out similarities there. Yet within 20 years, you've got Urban II coming out with the strongest, most violent propaganda against the people of Islam.